It's something like, I mean, it should have cost $1 million, and we pulled it off for a quarter of that. But, a lot of friends helping out. And I was blessed with an amazing cast, an amazing crew. Who did we have? Well, along with my son, Bodie Elfman. And it wasn't just nepotism. If you look him up on IMDb, he's got 100 credits.
It was a little bit nepotism.
Yeah, he's a series regular all the time. And Rebecca Forsyth.
I know you like to keep it in the family.
But we also had French Stewart from Third Rock on the Sun, George Wendt from Cheers, Vern Troyer, who I miss dearly, his last film, played the Emperor of the Clown Universe, Out to Get Earth, Nick Novicki from Boardwalk Empire. So we had like a great cast.
Do you have to get some people to do some favors for you, or how?
Are you kidding? I pay them back with barbecues up on my deck, but no, the whole thing was favors.
It sounds fun.
I've got to say, it's a laugh-a-minute film. What I did is it's like an insane, wacky whatever, but underneath there's a solid story structure. There's a MacGuffin: boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl. You can follow it.
What's the turnaround time on something like that from sitting down at the typewriter? A year, beginning to end?
I wrote it. When you walk out, did you see a little garret on the rooftop?
I didn't.
That's my writing garret.
1 year from start to end?
It's about what it takes to do an independent film. I mean, right now, I've got all these rocket ship shots to do, but we can't, we're pulling favors to get them done. So we can't say, like, I want it yesterday.
Yeah.
It was like, please, please.
They talk about how the barrier of entry for creating any sort of creative content at this point is lower. Obviously there's all these SoundCloud musicians, you can just record something into your computer and put it out into the world. Do you find that technology has made the process of filmmaking easier on your end?
Well, the biggest change is going digital as opposed to 35 millimeter film. And unless someone's going to give me $200 million, and I don't see them knocking on the door this week, you can do anything digitally and make it look as good, and you avoid all these steps. It actually allowed me to work with 2 cameras. We had these Red Epics, so I got twice as much footage as I would normally get.
What percentage of your life at this point is devoted to filmmaking?
Well, it's kind of half and half at the moment because, I'm in and out of the editing room, but I'm putting up a live theater production in a week and a half. You
were telling me your schedule before, and I couldn't believe how many things you're doing.
It's another very poignant play called Dead Man's Boner. And we've put a live music orchestra together with Igo Plum, Ernesto Guerrero, called Mambo Diabolico Ensemble. But this is the story, again, very poignant, about an inbred family dealing with interdimensional conflicts, like the dimensions coming apart.
Now, how does something like that come together? I mean, I tend to think of you as being a filmmaker, but you've done plenty of plays as well.
I came from theater. Yeah, I came from theater. And then I had a print magazine and a website and a second website for 5-6 years. I've actually produced 300 videos. Yeah, they're not online at the moment. You can go to YouTube and see little clips of them. But that was, I wanted my own media empire.
How's that working out?
See that apartment building next door? It cost me that one, but I still own that one to pay for the stakes.
So property. If you've got one piece of advice for surviving in Los Angeles as a creative, hang on to property.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Forbidden Zone, my first film, cost me my house. I ain't complaining. I mean,
Have you ever made money doing something creative?
Yeah. Not as much as like fixing it up an old apartment building. But I'm very confident about Hipsters, Gangsters, because it's probably the most commercial thing I've ever written and the funniest. And I was somehow blessed with the right crew and the right cast, and they gave it.
Do you feel like there's a good avenue at this point for distributing something like that? Obviously, again, in the way that the barrier of entry is lowered for content creation, it's also lowered for actually distributing it out into the world. And it sounds like you're confident that this is going to get a pretty sizable audience of interest.
Well, actually, we had a very reputable mid-sized sales company, Lightning Entertainment, has picked up the film, and they are helping us with our completion money, and they're making sales right now. It's with clips and whatever. So it's worked out.
Where are you at with Forbidden Zone 2? Again, I know this has been quite the labor of love for you.
It's basically get Hipsters out. Yeah. According to the producers, the same producers, and we'll close Forbidden Zone 2.
They said, I mean, that's really strange marketing order. They told you that they needed another film in the interim.
Well, they said, like, what can we do cheaper and quicker? Forbidden Zone 2 is a couple million bucks.
Yeah.
And this one should have cost $1 million, but we just got it done for cheaper. But just the way it works. It's so now companies are talking to us about Forbidden Zone 2, where they weren't talking to us before.
You think some of your friends in Hollywood see your name on the phone, see you're calling, and are just like, oh no, Richard wants to do another movie?
Quite the contrary. No. They're hoping it's an invitation to one of my wild parties and fabulous barbecues. I love that quote of Anthony Bourdain on your Facebook page, by the way. Although I'm married to a vegetarian, but she's not militant.
Yeah.
Our daughter eats meat. I do regular dinners, and I'm an outdoor cook. I call myself a refined Neanderthal because I'll grill anything that grows, walks, swims, or flies. Aside from my wife, we have friends that are vegetarians and vegans, and I respect whatever. I'll accommodate whomever.
How long have you been working on this sequel to Forbidden Zone?
5 years.
5 years. So was it clear early on after the first movie came out that it necessitated a sequel?
No, quite the contrary. The first thing came and went and disappeared. I lost all rights to it. And there were problems with the music clearances. So it went off the air and it just disappeared. And then about 10, 12 years ago, I put my first site up. And then I got tens of thousands of emails from all over the world of people that had seen, I guess, bootleg copies. And then a couple of years ago when I did a crowdfunder to get the development money for Forbidden Zone 2, we raised it right away, and that allowed me to do the script, hire an art director, do mock-ups, have some music composed. And we actually had a company. It cost me a year, though. This happens all the time in Hollywood that, you're greenlit, you've got a film, it's all working, and then they're having some trouble with their other film, the date gets pushed back, and then the guy at the company leaves and go to some other company, and then they stop returning calls after a year. So, we went through one of those.
It sounds like in a strange way, it was the cult success, the recent interest in the film was almost helped by the fact that it has been difficult to access. I mean, in a time where everything is online all the time, is constantly accessible, this idea that there's this cult film that you can still only get through bootlegs is almost an appeal in and of itself.
I suppose so, although not meaning to brag. I have a philosophy about music, and I get all my visual ideas from music. There's serviceable music, and then what I call there's memorable music. Chicago's a great example of serviceable music, and I loved the stage production. I salivated over the film. It was just so beautiful. But by the time you get to the car, you forget the music. Other than like all that jazz or something like that. They're just cliches.
The bones of the song.
Yeah. But you go to West Side Story, Fiddler on the Roof, Wizard of Oz. These are timeless pieces of music. And what I had in Forbidden Zone is I had timeless music. I go through thousands of things, kind of like an example would be "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," where they here were gems hidden in plain sight, or Buena Vista Social Club. What I used to do before the band Oingo Boingo was a musical theatrical troupe called the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo, and we'd present to audiences things great that they no longer could hear live. Josephine Baker, Cab Calloway, Duke Ellington. But so Forbidden Zone had all these great classics, and then I lucked out that my little brother, no musical training, turned out to be Mozart. I've got timeless music in Forbidden Zone. Forbidden Zone 2 is also going to have timeless music, and so that carries it. Cult, whatever. People will always enjoy it.
I think that carries it, but I also think the aesthetics are important from the standpoint of...
You mean obscenity and absurdity?
Well, but also, sure.
Yeah, I guess that never hurts.
The visuals are so striking in the movie that it's one of those movies where if you had seen 20 years ago and completely forgotten about, some of it's going to stay with you. It's a musical film, but it's also such a visual film, based on, again, these sort of like old black and white movies and cartoons, that I suspect that there's this feeling that kind of lingers from the movie.
Well, I'll tell you a secret. Life can be absurd.
You heard it here first.
And Richard Elfman films have a high degree of absurdity.
Yeah. I think part of that also stems from the fact that, that it's so unlike everything else. I mean that as a compliment. I want you to know.
I'm inspired by things, but I have my own vision. It's for some people, and for other people it isn't.
You had a theater training. You're doing the musical troupe around the same time. What had to come together to make you decide to sit down and make your own film?
Okay, so I had this group, Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo, kind of a musical theatrical troupe. And my rule at the time was nothing contemporary. It either had to be completely original, insane Danny Elfman, or classics from the past. And then, here's this 12, 14-piece group, but it was unwieldy, to tour, to do anything. And then life kind of changed it to an 8-person rock group, which was Oingo Boingo. So I wanted to preserve on film essentially what I'd been doing on stage. So the film was really my stage show, that I wanted to preserve.
As one of the things about theater is kind of ethereal. You spend all this time working on something, and it's limited to the people who are in the room seeing it, assuming that, that production...
Oh, yeah, you've got moments where it's just perfect, but it's going to fade in their minds.
Yeah.
And something about a film is you get hit by a truck, and you can know that people could watch it 90 years later.
Clearly you enjoy the experience of making a film, because that really, you've devoted a lot of your time to that over the past several decades.
Yeah. I've done a few that were very rough conditions, were not my own script or as a hired gun, that weren't as fun.
All these mediums you're working in, what's the most purely pleasurable artistic pursuit that you have?
Well, it's directing material that I've written.
Regardless of whether it's on
as opposed
stage.
To being a hired gun.
Yeah.
Then I get the full artistic satisfaction.
Doesn't matter whether it's a film or theater production?
Yeah, we're putting a Dead Man's Boner is going up. I have an alternate title called Suddenly Last Dimension that we had to do just, for some ads and stuff like that. But it's a little theater in North Hollywood. I'm doing this with Force of Nature Productions. There'll be some other plays. And my wife Anastasia does avant-garde burlesque that we'll be doing to original music.
Is that rewarding when you do something for that short a period of time, when you know that this is only going to exist for, a few shows?
It was more like, I don't know, maybe I had too many glasses of whiskey and my third cigar up in my little riding garret, and bang, there was my one act. And so my wife Anastasia's in this marvelous theater company, Force of Nature. I said, hey, do you want to put my one act up? And they said, sure. And then we created a music group to play live with it, which is fantastic. I'll show you a little bit after our podcast.
You feel that you're in a position now where you can, anything that you write, you're going to be able to ultimately find a home for?
Yeah, after years of scraping and begging and stealing.
But it seems like a pretty good arrangement of going up there, having a few glasses of whiskey, writing something, and knowing that, somewhere at some point it's going to see the light of day.
I've got 300 videos that I produce that aren't online right now,
yeah.
So you never know.
Yeah. How do you keep going after a big disappointment, after really pouring yourself into something and it just not getting out there, not reaching people? How do you sit down the next day and work on the next thing?
I've always had a pretty, I guess, cup half full attitude.
Yeah.
I've got a wonderful family, great friends. I love to entertain, and I just got a film in the can with a dream cast and a dream crew. And it looks like that'll allow us to do 2-3 more. And that'll allow us to do more if I don't fuck up and go crazy, which is always possible.
Do you feel like you're always walking that line? Go crazy, maybe given what you do, that depends on which way you go crazy. It could potentially be beneficial.
I've always been a controlled crazy where I could like do business at the same time.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say you're a control freak, which I thought would be kind of interesting. Do you tend to micromanage these things?
It's very funny particularly with digital film, and I can't do this with every actor, but I had some great comics, including Steve Agee, Rebecca Forsyth, Angeline Rose Troy, along with French Stewart, George Wendt, Nick Novicki. I get it the way it was in the script. So I had it. And I go, okay, kids, even to George Wendt, kids, do anything the fuck you want. And sometimes it was junk, and sometimes it was much better than anything I wrote.
Yeah.
And so that's the beauty of digital, that I'm not worried about counting to be developed in the lab and stuff like that. So I got a lot of improv after I got it the way it was written in the script, if that makes sense.
I also suspect that there has to be a certain level of kind of understanding that given budgetary constraints that you have when making these movies, that it's not going to look exactly like it was in your brain when producing the film.
Well, that's the whole struggle of the artist, is taking something in the mind and then putting it into the physical universe that other people can look at. and to what degree it's altered. And also, film is a collaborative medium, with the director of photography. I have an editor that gives, David Avalone, he's brilliant. He gives me just the right amount of fight to stop me from shooting myself in the foot.
The good kind of fight.
Yeah. So I like that.
Have you gotten better about collaborating with people in the early days when you first started doing this? Were you a little bit more of a control freak?
I am and I am not. If I were to describe directing, half of it is suppressing the creativity of others and half of it is encouraging it. I once directed Rod Steiger in a vampire movie, and he was this frumpy old German professor, Von Helsing, but he wanted to dress like a gunslinger with a cowboy hat. So I had to Rod, you can't do it. What do you mean? But this is perfect. Rod, you can't do it. So, and then everybody's suggesting things and okay, that's interesting, but let's do it like in the script. But then on the other hand, actors are constantly surprising me with stuff in their performance. And the DP suggests shots that I didn't think of.
Do you find that your approach to that has changed over the years now that you've been doing this for a while with regards to how much control you're willing to give up?
No.
No?
No.
Exactly the same as you were
day
one?
Yeah.
I do think it's funny when the first example you come up with when talking about telling an actor no is Rod Steiger.
Oliver Stone was originally producing a script by Matthew Bright, who wrote Freeway. And for some reason, I was given 2 Matthew Bright scripts to direct. Some other producers pushed Stone off the production, which was stupid. But anyway, so I had 18 days to shoot this film, and it wasn't like I had months and months and months. So Steiger comes there. It's his first day on the set. And I go, okay, this is the staging. We're going to start here and then go here and then end the scene here. And he goes, well, I haven't blocked it out that way. And I said, well, Mr. Steiger, we had to pre-light it last night. And he goes, pre-light it? Pre-light it? And then he starts screaming at me, Elie Kazan never treated actors this way. What the fuck do you know, kid? What the fuck do you know? And so I rolled. The crew was terrified. And instead of walking from A to B, we lost a half an hour, and he bananaed around a little bit from A to B. So then I kind of got my nerve together. I called his agent. I said, that's it. I can't work like this. And so from that point on, I made him do it exactly as I wanted it. And he would deliver brilliant performances and then sometimes go these big tirades, whatever. But then he'd call me at 3 a.m. crying, was I believable? Yes, Mr. Steiger, you were believable. And I've got to say, I had some younger actors that he would spend hours going over lines and stuff like that. And he was great to work with, but twice a week, he'd have a fit. And it wasn't just a fit, it was like a stentorian trumpet. If I had more hair, it was blowback. And it's I'm an ex-boxer, so, okay, let him go. And then, okay, Mr. Steiger, take your mark, please. Action. And it won the respect of the crew because I was the only one that stood up to him.
It sounds like you were a part of some studio system at that point that they were handing you scripts to direct.
No, I've done some ABC television, but not. And these were independent films. These 2 Matthew Bright scripts that I did.
The ABC thing just felt like a job at the time.
A friend of mine, Adam Rivkin, who's just. God, what has he just done? Something with Burt Reynolds, something with Penn and Teller, I don't know what. He got a series with ABC, comedy horror, so he hired film directors. So I was the main director there.
This does not seem to be the case now, and it certainly didn't seem to be the case early on, but where you were really just sort of taking jobs to survive?
No.
How have you managed to do what you've done for so long?
Every 5-10 years, investors come to me and say, go do some real estate. And I find buildings and I kind of fix them up, and I'm the co-owner. This one I own completely myself. This is completely rehabilitating, housing projects and holding them for 5 years and managing them. I dropped out of college after a semester, and I opened 2 clothing stores, one adjacent UC Berkeley, one adjacent UC Santa Barbara. So I didn't go to college, but I clothed those who did.
It was an education of sorts?
Yeah, and then in the evenings I was in a group in San Francisco called the Coquettes. C-O-C-K.
Yeah, I got that.
And I was in I'm a Latin percussionist, which was my original thing. So I was in an Afro-Cuban group called the Conditos.
I'm going to rewind a little bit. There's a lot of information to process there. You know, you were selling clothing, you were doing percussion. Did you have a clear idea of what you wanted to do, what you thought your chief creative pursuit was? Was everything you were working on really working toward a certain end?
I had two big shifts. The first one was I was 15 and a half years old and ran into some party in Watts, and it was this beautiful black Cuban lady who played me music from Cuba by Celia Cruz, Homene a los Santos, started in Spanish and went into Yoruban from West Africa. And that was an epiphany. So that was my whole thing, was Afro percussion.
Red-haired Jewish boy from L.A.
Well, first of all, I was born on 103rd Street in Watts, and then we moved up to Crenshaw. So I've always I grew up with the African-American community. I can't tell you stuff. Yeah, but okay, but anyway, in a nutshell, so it was all music.
Yeah.
And then when I was in the Bay Area and I saw the Coquettes perform, and they would do send-ups, it was a largely transvestite troupe, send-ups of old musicals and Max Fleischer cartoons. And then there were some art theaters there, and I started looking at French cinema. And then I realized I wanted to do film and theater.
It sounds like you had a few almost artistic epiphanies, or a few moments where you heard something for the first time. I mean, I talk about this a lot. I can probably count on one hand the moments where I felt like I made a decision that really impacted the rest of my life. You know, that sort of like cinematic moment, the thing you see in movies, your life really being at a crossroads. And it sounds like there's a few moments you can really point to where you encounter this thing for the first time, and this felt like the thing that maybe you wanted to spend your life doing.
Okay, I don't want to get mystical on you.
No, please.
I don't know if there's such a thing as past lives. Although I have a younger brother, Danny Elfman, that not only didn't study music, the kid wasn't into music. There was no record collection, never went to concerts, nothing. And then we get him a guitar, he's like 15, 16. And then a month later, he could pick out a Django Reinhardt solo. Okay, then we get him a violin a month later.
It's Stefan Grappelli.
He could do the Stepan Grappelli accompaniment. And for me, it was like that with percussion, that I was just able to play. Like I'd been there before, and I've always been like the only white guy in these all black groups. But like, where did I get it? I think I was like 20 years old, 21, and I saw this French film, Les Enfants de Paradis, the Children of Paradise. It was an amazing film about the French theater scene in the 1830s. And it's like a 3-hour film. It's a classic. And I walked out of the theater, turned a circle, and walked back and saw it again. Then, it's just one of these things. The Coquettes were supposed to go to a Festival of a New Theater in Toronto. And then they couldn't it was too unwieldy a group. They just couldn't get it together to get there. By chance, my father got sick in northern Canada, and I had to go up and sort it out. And then I stopped back in Toronto to see this Festival of a New Theater. And I ran into this scruffy, almost a street group from Paris. This guy, Jerome Savary, and the Grand Magic Circus. And I'm talking to them, and boy, they sure wish they had a percussionist. I had my drums flown in, and I said, but give me 3 minutes in the show. So I played percussion with their musical stuff, and they gave me 3 minutes to stage, where I did this kind of surrealistic thing from the Coquettes, where I was in a dress and stabbed the piano player to Eric Satie music. Okay, so I go back to California with my clothing stores. They go back to Paris. Peter Brook, the legendary director from the Royal Shakespeare Company, picked them up and gave them a big budget and an 800-seat theater. They invited me to Paris. So 6 months after seeing that film, I was in a French theater company. We sold out 800 seats for a year, and Jerome Savary, under the mentorship of Peter Brook, went on to become the director of the French National Theater. Danny graduated high school, shows up in Paris with his violin. Our violinist was from the Paris Opera. Jerome liked to improvise a bit, and this guy from the opera could not go off score. Danny could follow anything, so Danny got the gig, and that was his first professional thing, was playing with me in Paris.
So what does all this mean? What's the moral here? I mean,
I don't know. I lost track of the question.
You said earlier, I don't want to get mystical.
No. It's just Danny plays like a dozen instruments, and I play serious Afro percussion. And it was something that I didn't study. It just almost came to me like lightning hit me. When I went to Paris, I had this overwhelming feeling that I'd been there before. But who knows? Maybe it was the booze.
You felt this sense that, perhaps like in a past life that you had...
It was an overwhelming feeling. First, when I heard that music go from Spanish to Yoruban, was that overwhelming feeling. And then I could suddenly play the music. And then when I went to Paris was an overwhelming feeling that I'd been there before.
Is this something that's reoccurred in your life, or is it really just that particular moment?
Those were the big ones.
When you get that feeling, the sense that it's almost fate, that you're there.
Like when I took up formal English writing, I had the strong sense that I hadn't done that before.
I get that feeling a lot. I get that feeling just about every day of my life. When you have that moment, when it really does feel like something divine intervention, or that you're a part of something larger, how do you harness that?
Well, I was in the theater group for 2 years, married the leading lady, have a French son, who I lives in L.A., works with me. And then after 2 years, I wanted to start my own group. And that's how I started the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo. Danny went from the theater group, spent a year in Africa. Talk about balls with no money. He went from the West Coast to the East Coast, playing with indigenous tribes and stuff like that. So he came, I got him to be my musical director for the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo. I went off into other things after a certain point, and he had the rock band Oingo Boingo.
When you've done so many things in the lead up to that, I mean, it sounds like in a sense you lived a lot of lives prior to that.
Hell, I'm older than Lestat. You should see my picture in the basement aging away.
How do you know you're doing the right thing?
How the fuck does anyone know if they're doing the right thing?
I mean, it seems like
those
moments where you were like, boom, Afro-Cuban music, boom, like all these things.
Okay, well, at the Belfry Theater with Force of Nature Production, I'll be playing with the Mambo Diabolico Ensemble. I'll be playing Afro-Cuban music along with, there's this great composer who works with my brother. His name's Ego Plum. His real name is Ernesto Guerrero. But he does, he's a monster composer. And so I'm still playing the music. As a matter of fact, I was down in Crenshaw a few weeks ago backing up a singer doing an Ella Fitzgerald retrospective, with jazz musicians and stuff.
Are you happy with the level that you're at with regards to the...
No, I wish I had tens of millions of dollars. I could just do anything the fuck I wanted. But no, it's still a struggle. It's still a fight. But I'm getting enough done that I'm happy and feel blessed.
I mean, I suspect, like, given the people that you know and given how long you've been doing it and the fact that you did direct shows for ABC, that if you really wanted to be a part of the studio system, you have the skill set to do it, certainly.
Well, here was my biggest connection to the studio system. Okay, so I put on, like, huge parties and events. And so this one, I have a cousin who's a bigwig in the business, and so we had all the bigwigs there. And I had this full moon. We're drunk out of our minds. I also play Afro-Brazilian music. I play with a couple samba groups. This is like percussion samba, not bossa nova, like the heavy carnival street stuff.
Yeah.
So I've got this amazing group, and we're at my cousin's mansion. The guy that the player was based on in real life, who is the head of a studio, the most powerful man in Hollywood, walks by my musicians, and he loudly says in earshot, God, why couldn't they get some real music? And these are the sweetest guys, and it was just like a knife in their gut. And it was a black tie party. So I picked the fuck up, and I took him to the pool. And like Dracula, like he's putting me under the ether, like I'll never work again. He's dying of tuberculosis. It'll kill him. He didn't want to go in the pool. I threw him in the pool in his tuxedo. Okay? No one could fucking believe it. This was a man who was feared, but he was hated. If you could see him struggle out of the pool in his tuxedo. And I went back to the Brazilian musicians and apologized for his boorish behavior.
This is an explanation of why you're not a part of the studio system.
Maybe.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, Richard. Was this an isolated incident, or do you feel like this is a symptom of a larger issue with authority that you might have?
Well, except for the 2 art-related felonies, but we're way past the statute, so I can tell you about them. I'm also a writer. I've done columns for years. I've actually done a column for our mutual friend Josh.
Yeah.
I've written, and interesting how you just quoted Anthony Bourdain, but a lot of my writing has been food, wine, and travel. Okay, so I'm writing for these West Side yuppie publications. And I did a particularly lot of research on this article going from restaurant bars down the coast. So I turned the article in, the publisher, who's a friend and I was doing some other work with, went to some meditation conference, comes back with some lady editor. And he said, "Oh, do you mind if she edits your piece?" And I tell her, "Well, editing will make me seem the better writer. What has she edited before?" "Well, she has a natural sense of editing." "Well, what has she done before?" "She hadn't edited anything." So she rewrote my first paragraph. I said, "Don't print it." Okay, so I'm just pissed off.
Yeah.
I bump into him a week later, and then he goes on like, "Tom, what's the deal?" And he had found the light now, and everything about me was disgusting. Eating meat, liquor, cigars is just this horrible lifestyle, and I'm terrible. And I couldn't sleep all night. And then I woke up in the morning, and I rewrote the article a little bit saltier. Okay, so then I had it printed on paper. It was 11 by 17 magazine, but incrementally smaller. And then I broke into their warehouse at midnight with a crew in a moving van and a photographer from the LA Weekly.
You weren't kidding about the crime part of this.
And I took 50,000 copies of the magazine. This filled a moving van. And I left a little note on the wall that the magazine had been requisitioned by the LA restaurant critics Guerrilla Underground. Okay, so I guess the next day they just figured it went to the distributor. It was just too big a thing. Oh, I guess Joe picked it up, whatever. So anyway, when the shit hit the fan... Oh, I had it distributed to newsstands. I had some insiders that I paid off the staff. Okay, so then he charged me. I was charged with felony grand theft. So I got a temporary restraining order on his cable show that had a bunch of my material that I hadn't signed releases, and he was forced to drop the charges. The LA Weekly was then given permission. I had the whole crime photographed, and they called it Grand Theft Auto. His circulation went through the roof, and 2 months later, he fired that editor. 3 months later, I was back writing for him. We're friends to this day. The other was just simply felony extortion to get a crew paid from some asshole rich producer, but that I won't get into that one.
One of those three things turned out pretty well for you in the grand scheme, but when you look back at these moments where you're sort of, again, kind of at a crossroads where, you could have stayed in the system, you could have towed the line, but you made this decision to very much go in the other direction. Do you ever have a sense of regret that you didn't continue down that path?
I don't know. It's just I'm happy where I'm at right now. I've got like a great family. I've got a theater piece going.
You'd like a little more money.
I've got a film coming out.
Yeah.
Even though I lost the one building with my startup, I still own this one that I could put food on the table and throw barbecues only with $15 wines instead of $100 wines. I'm not complaining.
There you go. That was an absolutely delightful conversation with Richard Elfman. His upcoming film is called Hipsters, Gangsters, Aliens, and Geeks. That's coming out this year. Thanks so much to him for taking the time to do that and hosting me at his place in Hollywood. Thanks to a friend of the show, Josh Frudlinger, for helping to set up that conversation. Thanks to you guys as always for listening to the program. If you do like the show, there are a number of ways to support us. You can rate and review us on iTunes or Google Podcasts, or wherever you happen to get your podcasts. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Tumblr. That's rylcast.tumblr.com. That is the first and best place to get all of your RIYL-related information. I think that's about it for this week, so stick around because we are going to be back just about this time next week with another episode of RIYL.